The Goldenrod Protocols by James Oliver. Copyright 2023.
You're blowing this. Blowing what? Is that how you see yourself? Boring? He watched Frank load dirty glasses from a rubber mat into the dishwasher. No, but it doesn't matter much. I can't change my class or control the job codes I'm approved for. I can't control anything, really. The look on Molly's face may have been pity, but it also may have been love. Not romantic love. Something more motherly. The true love for all that only certain people possessed. A genuine desire for others to be happy, to live the best life possible. Are you sure? Yeah. He brought his beer to his lips but stopped short of a sip. All the music and voices were swept aside by a revelation he heard much louder and more clearly. For once, you have a choice. He took his sip and surrendered to his musings. You can sweep her off her feet just like in the movies. Just like in your fantasies. You can run away with her and live the life you've always dreamed of, a life you determined and where you were important. You can be who and what you always wanted to be. Molly winced and cocked her head as she waited for an answer. Or, you can be content in this moment to share with her the most private parts of who you are that you could never share before and can never share again. You won't become the man you want, the leading man she's looking for. She'll pity you. She won't want you. But she won't judge you. She'll care. She'll listen. You'll be safe. He shifted in his stool. He didn't know how to have options. His guilt returned with the image of Claire. Molly would not be his lover, but she could still be his savior. He was ashamed to decide this only now, but lamented having to decide at all. Molly watched, still awaiting an answer. He drew a breath for a long, cathartic reply. "Oh, come on," yelled a patron across the bar. "What a bunch of pussies." Jack was distracted by a commotion on the baseball field. The coaches were arguing with the referees. He watched the same shortstop who'd been driven to the ground slide into the base in the slow-motion video playing over the chatter. He drove his spiked shoes into the shin of a player in gray, who fell to the ground. "I don't see a problem here," claimed the indignant announcer. "That's what happens when you block a base runner." Jack was confused. But that's exactly what the other guy did. "That's how the game is played, sweetheart," yelled the grizzly man. "Jack?" He turned to Molly's concerned and genuinely interested face and strained to remember her question. "Are you sure you can't change it?" "If there's a way to change it, I haven't figured it out." Molly's sadness pursed her lips. Well, let's brainstorm." Jack had painstakingly mulled this over countless times. He'd seen every stone and met every toad, and it always led to the same place. Molly invigorated him, but he refused to walk it again, even with her by his side. He watched Frank slide clean-stemmed glasses into the overhead rack while he searched his mind for a new, different trail he and Molly could blaze. "Hey," called an older man sitting past Molly around the corner. "I bet this is a ghost job," he proclaimed with obviously unearned confidence. His dirty hand held his bottle slightly tilted next to his chin, always ready for his next sip. He stared at Jack with a crooked smile, awaiting praise for his insight. "What?" Jack asked. "I said I bet it's a ghost job. It's got JG written all over it." "Leave him alone, Charlie," Frank warned. "He's here for a good time. Let them be." Jack turned to Molly. "What's he talking about?" Charlie was flummoxed. "You don't know the JG?" he asked. "He's from the state," Molly told Charlie before flashing Jack a coy half-smile. "He's a pilgrim." "I should have guessed," Frank chuckled, glancing at Jack's beer as he wiped a smudge from a glass. "Tell him, Molly," Charlie insisted. "Come on, Charlie, stop. Keep politics out of the bar," Frank repeated. He walked over to Jack and leaned in. "Ignore him. He's a little—" Frank rolled his eyes and swung his finger in circles around his temple. Jack didn't know what to say. "I don't even know what he's talking about." Frank nodded to the TV while he pulled the last few glasses from the dishwasher. "He thinks Jacob's ghosts did this. He always says that." Jack followed the nod to the interrupting news broadcast on the TV. The banner at the bottom read, "12 dead in Wilmington appliance factory bombing." A dark chill froze Jack's bones. Cyclone was the only appliance factory in Wilmington. Molly, Frank, even Charlie were all suddenly so far away. The ambient voices and tunes from the jukebox were muffled, like he was trapped underwater and trying to hear sounds from the air above. The images from the TV projected right into his mind, ignoring the space between and pushing everything else he had ever known to the side, and he couldn't look away. They burrowed somewhere deep, beneath the quantum boundary of his psyche. In that moment, he couldn't have told you his name or where he was. He'd been pushed out of time. And as he clawed his way back, he tried to make out the buildings surrounding the factory through the smoke and the spray from the fire hoses. Sure enough, it was his factory. Specifically, it was the assembly wing where he worked. The rest of the campus was unscathed. The timestamp on the video was 5:45, an hour after he left. Over an hour before he was supposed to leave. His surroundings reintegrated with his mind. If I hadn't left, he speculated, over and over, unable at first to finish his thought for its sheer ungraspability, I'd be dead. He felt his heartbeat all over his skin when the newscast showed the profiles picture of the prime suspect. It's him! Jude Solder, suspected in attack, read the crawling chyron. The man on the TV was the trainee who left sick. Jude, not Jim. I knew it started with J. That's why he left. He had to get clear before the detonation. Jack's mind raced. Did he plant it during the training? Did I miss something? What if I'd told him he couldn't leave? He wouldn't have detonated the bomb. The cleaning crew would have found it. Am I responsible? An even more chilling revelation crept in. The news reported 12 dead. There were 12 trainees, and Jack was supposed to be there, making 13 people. Jude was alive. No one knew Jack left early, and his link was in his office. I'm the 12th dead man. Chapter 5. Jack slouched in Molly's passenger seat, watching the shapeless forms pass through the darkness behind the window. There wasn't much to him in that moment. None of the inner richness that made up his mind, his soul, or his essence, just the faintest hint of a self. Too many explosive revelations came too fast when the shock wore off and the sights and sounds of Conrad's came rushing back. Oh my God. All the trainees. Do I still have a job? Fuck, I have to explain why I left. Claire. Holy shit. His mind found a quiet spot to hide, like an overwhelmed waitress sneaking a cigarette during the dinner rush. Molly finally broke the silence. You don't have to be embarrassed. The words got stuck somewhere just inside his ear. She said something, Jack. He turned to Molly's moonlit face. I know, he assured her. She assumed he was embarrassed because she had to pay for his drinks, and he probably would have been under different circumstances. But now, it was the least of his worries. He replayed the final moments at Conrad's, like rewatching the last few minutes of a movie before you paused it to remember what was happening. You okay, bud? Frank had asked. You look a little pale. Jack didn't answer. He realized now, looking back, that he didn't even hear the question. Jack. He remembered Molly touching his arm. Everything all right? There'd been true concern on her face. That's where I work, he'd wanted to shout, but he'd imagined how it might go. That's where I work, he'd say. Hearing it out loud would make it real. Someone bombed my factory. Fuck. Frank would say something like, whoa, calm down, buddy. Jack would do the opposite. The progs around the bar would turn to see the commotion. Molly would get uncomfortable. The self Jack had so carefully constructed would start to crumble. He'd mark himself an outsider once again. Yeah, I'm fine, he'd finally replied. Sorry, I just realized how late it is. My wife is waiting for me. Molly had grabbed his arm again. You know I wasn't criticizing you, right? He remembered struggling to remember what she said before the news break. I mean, I don't live in the state, but I know how restrictive job codes are, she'd continued. Oh, right. Don't worry about it, really, he'd reassured her. Just tell her, one of him had insisted. No, demanded the other. Hiding his thoughts was second nature after a lifetime in a metro state. I'll take my check, he'd told Frank. Frank had told him it would be $10.50, and Jack slid his bank card from his wallet. He remembered noticing how crisp and clean it was. He normally used his link to pay. Will it work here? He remembered thinking, just before a chill ran through his blood. Will my bank report me for coming here? He remembered Frank's impatience. This isn't the state. Cash only. Jack pushed his legs together in Molly's passenger seat and squirmed. The embarrassment, not that she had to pay, but that he had been so unprepared for such a basic task, was palpable, even half an hour later. They really use cash? Jack's father used to tell him how important cash was, but he had no idea where to get it. The Abbeys denied its existence. Economists published articles dissecting the concept and dismissing it as unworkable in any economy, ever. It was an allegiant myth. Anyone who believed it had ever existed was mocked, even though there were news stories here and there about someone being arrested for possessing it. I'm sorry, I don't have any cash, Jack had told Frank. He remembered Frank shaking his head. Can't come to a place like this without cash, buddy. He swiped a towel from atop the fridge. This is a different world. You got a lot to learn. Frank walked away, holding his anger towel sadly by his side. Molly had come to his defense. Come on, cut him a break. He wanted to try a new place and he didn't know. Just put his beer on my tab. She'd seemed taller somehow, the way adults seemed so much bigger when Jack was a kid, even the short ones. He felt small. You don't have to do that, he wanted to say. But really, she did. Thank you, was all he could muster. But he couldn't think about it anymore. There was too much humiliation, realizing the shuttle had stopped running, that his devotion quotient wasn't high enough to take the train, hanging his head and asking Molly for a ride home. No wonder she thinks I'm embarrassed. I'll just have to buy you a drink next time I'm in Middletown, he offered, watching her face lighten and darken by the passing highway lights. Molly smiled. Jack smiled back, but it was a formality. He could never go to that place again. As he turned back to the window to watch the city's sparkling silhouettes pass under the dim starlight, the gravity of what had happened came back to him. Holy shit. The plant was bombed. The plant was fucking bombed. Figures. High hopes crushed by something I couldn't control. He couldn't decide if the bombing was a punishment or a reminder that his life didn't belong to him. It wasn't so much that his night was ruined, that he could handle. It was that this was always the only outcome no matter what he'd done. The cities seemed even further away now than they did from 1,200 feet in the air. He hated them even more now, these shadowy reminders that he didn't have a place, not there, not at his job, not in his home, not in the legacy town. A passing streetlight brightened his reflection, and his own contempt stared back at him from behind the glass. He turned the other way, unable to face his own judgment, and watched Molly while she watched the road. Thank God for you. Thank God you own a car. He could only imagine how his night would have gone if he hadn't met her. Cash. He pondered the wonders and pitfalls of cash. It'd be an anchor in your pocket and a liability. What if I lost my wallet? What if it was stolen? But to spend without needing permission, to be so free. They're going to assume it was you. Every comment he'd ever made on Town Square flooded his mind. Would anything raise suspicion? The ground troops comment? That hollowhead called me an Aggie? What will the Abbeys think? He took a breath. No, I'm too careful. But that was no guarantee. There's no such thing as too careful. Should I be worried? Would they arrest him, throw him in jail, ply him with psychoactive drugs and hypnotize him, brainwash him to coerce a confession? Who's responsible for this? The last few concrete monoliths on the outskirts of the last upper line towns drifted by, leaving only the black farmland hills rolling beneath the faint light of other people's suns. You sure you're okay? Molly's light poked through the darkness. Yeah, you're not okay. Talk to her. Sometimes I feel out of place, he continued, like I'm living the wrong life. He'd stopped flirting with Molly after the news report, but the trust she'd earned lingered. He could be more honest with Molly than he could be with Claire. Things with Claire were tense. They'd been madly in love once. There was chemistry. Jack used to look into Claire's eyes and feel mighty. Claire's eyes were mirrors reflecting Jack's zest for life. He longed for her, and she for him. There was magic between them, but life had long since taken it away along with his ambition and sense of purpose. Now Claire's eyes reflected Jack's stagnation. Sometimes he couldn't tell which was the reflection and which was the original. Has Claire's discontent gotten in your way? He often asked himself. Maybe I could be more if she wasn't holding me back. How do you mean? She asked sincerely. This is going to sound crazy, he warned her. But I see Middletown from my shuttle every morning, and somewhere deep down I've always had a feeling whatever I was looking for was there. What are you looking for? I can't put my finger on it, he admitted. I just had a feeling that a legacy town was the kind of place I should have grown up, or where I should be living. His apartment tower complex poked into view down the road. Because I shouldn't be living there,